What happens when God gives a warrior permission to rewrite the laws of nature? Joshua discovered the answer when he prayed the most impossible prayer in human history and watched the universe obey. But here's what nobody tells you. This book is packed with secrets that will blow your mind. Ancient psychological warfare. A scarlet rope that saved an entire bloodline. Moldy bread that triggered international crisis. Hidden treasure that cost lives. Giants that terrorized nations. Until one old man decided enough was enough. Every page reveals supernatural strategies, divine plot twists and miracles that defy explanation. This isn't Sunday school stories. This is raw, unfiltered divine power in action. If you think you've heard these tales before, prepare to have your perspective completely shattered. The book of Joshua, like you've never seen before, starts now. Moses was gone. The greatest leader Israel had ever known lay buried somewhere in the mountains of Moab. And now the entire nation faced an impossible question. Who could possibly fill those shoes? The answer came directly from heaven itself. In the opening verses of chapter 1, God spoke to Joshua with crystal clarity. Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people, get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I am about to give to them, to the Israelites. I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. Joshua 1:2-3. This wasn't a suggestion or a gradual transition. This was divine appointment in its purest form. Joshua had served as Moses' assistant for decades, watching from the sidelines as his mentor performed miracle after miracle. But now God was calling him to step out of the shadow and into the spotlight. The transfer wasn't just about human leadership. It was about divine authority flowing through a new vessel. God made it personal and specific. I will give you every place where you set your foot. Every step Joshua would take in the promised land would be backed by heaven's guarantee. The promise extended beyond just land acquisition. God continued in verse 4, "Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon and from the great river, the Euphrates, all the Hittite country, to the Mediterranean Sea in the west." This wasn't a small inheritance. God was handing Joshua the deed to an empire that stretched across multiple nations and peoples. But perhaps the most powerful part of this leadership transfer came in verse 5. "No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you." The same divine presence that had parted the Red Sea, provided manna in the wilderness, and spoken from Mount Sinai, was now personally committed to Joshua's success. This wasn't just a promotion, it was a divine partnership that would reshape the entire ancient world. 3 times in the span of 9 verses, God hammered home the same message to Joshua: be strong and courageous. This wasn't accidental repetition. It was divine emphasis on the most critical quality Joshua would need for what lay ahead. The first command came in verse 6, "Be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their ancestors to give them." Here, God connected courage directly to Joshua's role as a leader. Leading millions of people into enemy territory would require the kind of bravery that doesn't come naturally to anyone. Joshua would need to make decisions that could cost thousands of lives, face enemies with superior weapons and fortified cities, and maintain confidence even when everything looked impossible. The second time appeared in verse 7, "Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go." This time, God linked courage to obedience. It takes real courage to follow God's commands when they don't make sense to human logic. Joshua would need the bravery to trust divine instructions even when they seemed foolish to military strategy. The third repetition came in verse 9. "Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid, do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." This final version was the most personal. God addressed Joshua's specific fears, the fear of failure, the fear of being overwhelmed, the fear of facing impossible odds. Why did God repeat this command 3 times? Because fear was going to be Joshua's greatest enemy. Not the Canaanites, not the fortified cities, not the giants, but the voice in his head telling him he wasn't qualified for this job. God knew that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to act despite fear. And Joshua was going to need massive doses of supernatural courage for what was coming. Each repetition built on the previous one, creating a foundation of divine confidence that would sustain Joshua through the darkest moments of the conquest. When doubt crept in, he could remember God said it 3 times, so it must be important. Most people think of the Law of Moses as a religious book filled with ceremonies and moral guidelines. But God had a different perspective. In verses 7 and 8 of chapter 1, he revealed the law's true strategic value. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Keep this book of the law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful. God wasn't just telling Joshua to be religious, he was giving him the ultimate battle plan. The law contained everything Joshua needed to know about warfare, diplomacy, economics, justice, and leadership. It was a comprehensive manual for nation building, disguised as a religious text. The connection between studying the law and military success wasn't coincidental. God promised that constant meditation on his commands would lead to prosperity and success. This meant that Joshua's daily Bible study wasn't separate from his military strategy. It was his military strategy. Every principle for conquering the land was hidden within the pages of Moses' writings. The phrase day and night showed the intensity required. This wasn't casual reading or weekly study. Joshua needed to be so saturated with God's instructions that they became his automatic response to every situation. When facing impossible odds, his first instinct should be to remember what God had already taught him through the law. God also specified that Joshua should keep the law always on your lips. This meant more than just thinking about it. He needed to speak it, teach it, and use it to guide every decision. The law was meant to be the lens through which Joshua viewed every challenge and opportunity. This approach would set Israel apart from every other nation. While their enemies relied on human wisdom and military might, Israel would succeed by following divine intelligence embedded in the law. It was the ultimate unfair advantage in warfare. In the ancient city of Jericho, a prostitute named Rahab was about to make the most important decision of her life. When 2 Israelite spies appeared at her door, she faced a choice that would determine not just her fate, but the fate of her entire family. Chapter 2, verse 1 sets the scene. Then Joshua, son of Nun, secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim. Go, look over the land, he said, especially Jericho. So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. The spies needed a place to blend in, and Rahab's house provided the perfect cover. Strangers coming and going wouldn't attract attention in her line of work, but Rahab had been watching. She had heard the stories of what Israel's God had done to Egypt and to the kings east of the Jordan. When the king of Jericho sent soldiers to capture the spies, Rahab made her move. Verse 4 reveals her strategy. But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. She said, "Yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they had come from." Her deception was masterful. In verses 5 and 6, she continued, "At dusk, when it was time to close the city gate, they left. I don't know which way they went. Go after them quickly. You may catch up with them." But she had taken them up to the roof and hidden them under the stalks of flax she had laid out on the roof. Rahab wasn't just helping strangers. She was betting everything on Israel's God. In verses 9 through 11, she revealed her motivation. I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the two kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts melted in fear, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven, above and on the earth below. This wasn't an emotional decision. It was a calculated risk based on intelligence. Rahab had analyzed the evidence and concluded that Israel's God was unstoppable. She recognized that fighting against heaven was futile. So she chose to join the winning side while she still could. Rahab's help came with a price, and it involved a simple piece of red rope that would become one of the most famous symbols in biblical history. The negotiation between Rahab and the spies revealed just how carefully she had thought through her defection. In verse 12 of chapter 2, Rahab made her demand, "Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family, because I have shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death." The spies recognized a fair deal when they heard one. Verses 14 and 15 record their response. "Our lives for your lives," the men assured her. "If you don't tell what we are doing, we will treat you kindly and faithfully when the Lord gives us the land." Then she let them down by a rope through the window, for the house she lived in was part of the city wall. But the spies weren't finished with their instructions. They gave Rahab very specific directions that would save her life. In verses 18 through 20, they explained the system. "When we enter the land, you must tie this scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down. And unless you have brought your father and mother, your brothers and all your family into your house, if any of them go outside your house into the street, their blood will be on their own heads. We will not be responsible. As for those who are in the house with you, their blood will be on our head if a hand is laid on them. But if you tell what we are doing, we will be released from the oath you made us swear." The scarlet cord became Rahab's insurance policy. As long as it hung from her window, every Israelite soldier would know that this house contained allies, not enemies. But it required faith to hang that rope, faith that the Israelites would keep their word, faith that they would actually conquer the city, and faith that the red cord would be visible enough to save her family in the chaos of battle. Verse 21 shows Rahab's immediate response. "Agreed," she replied. "Let it be as you say." She sent them away and they departed, and she tied the scarlet cord in the window. Rahab didn't hesitate or second-guess her decision. The cord went up immediately, marking her house as a sanctuary in the coming storm. The Jordan River stood between Israel and their destiny, and during flood season, it was absolutely impassable. But God had decided to open a highway through the water, using a method that would test everyone's faith to the limit. Chapter 3, verse 15 describes the challenge. "Now the Jordan is at flood stage, all during harvest time. Yet as soon as the priests who carried the ark reached the Jordan and their feet touched the water's edge, the water from upstream stopped flowing. The timing couldn't have been worse from a human perspective. The river was at its highest and most dangerous level of the entire year, but God's instructions to Joshua were precise and non-negotiable. Verses 10 through 13 reveal the divine strategy. "This is how you will know that the living God is among you, and that he will certainly drive out before you the Canaanites, Hittites, Hivites, Perizzites, Girgashites, Amorites, and Jebusites. See, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth will go into the Jordan ahead of you. Now then, choose 12 men from the tribes of Israel, one from each tribe. And as soon as the priests who carry the ark of the Lord of all the earth, set foot in the Jordan, its waters flowing downstream will be cut off and stand up in a heap." The plan required incredible faith from the priests. They had to step into raging floodwaters while carrying the most sacred object in Israel, the Ark of the Covenant. There was no guarantee that the water would stop until their feet actually touched the riverbed. It was all or nothing. Verses 16 and 17 record the miracle. The water from upstream stopped flowing. It piled up in a heap a great distance away, at a town called Adam, in the vicinity of Zarethan, while the water flowing down to the Sea of the Arabah, that is, the Dead Sea, was completely cut off. So the people crossed over opposite Jericho. The priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stopped in the middle of the Jordan and stood on dry ground, while all Israel passed by until the whole nation had completed the crossing on dry ground. This wasn't just transportation, it was a statement. God was announcing to every nation in Canaan that the same power that had split the Red Sea 40 years earlier was still active and still committed to Israel's success. The supernatural highway sent a clear message. Resistance was futile. God understood something that many leaders miss. If you don't preserve the memory of miracles, the next generation will forget them. That's why he immediately commanded Joshua to create a permanent memorial of the Jordan crossing, using the most ancient technology available, stones. Chapter 4, verses 1 through 3 contain God's detailed instructions. When the whole nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, "Choose 12 men from among the people, one from each tribe, and tell them to take up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, from right where the priests are standing, and carry them over with you, and put them down at the place where you stay tonight." The location of the stones was crucial. They had to come from the exact spot where the priests had stood, the place where heaven and earth had touched, where the impossible had become reality. These weren't just random rocks. They were physical evidence of divine intervention. Joshua understood the assignment perfectly. Verses 4 through 7 record his implementation. So Joshua called together the 12 men he had appointed from the Israelites, one from each tribe, and said to them, "Go over before the ark of the Lord your God into the middle of the Jordan. Each of you is to take up a stone on his shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of the Israelites, to serve as a sign among you. In the future, when your children ask you, 'What do these stones mean?' you tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. When it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. These stones are to be a memorial to the people of Israel forever." But Joshua didn't stop there. Verse 9 reveals that he created a second memorial. Joshua set up the 12 stones that had been in the middle of the Jordan at the spot where the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant had stood. And they are there to this day. 2 monuments, one portable, one permanent, ensuring that the miracle would never be forgotten. The genius of this system was its simplicity. Children would see the stones and ask questions. Parents would tell the story. The next generation would remember. It was ancient Israel's version of social media, designed to make important information go viral across generations. After crossing the Jordan, Israel found themselves in enemy territory with a massive problem: an entire generation of fighting men who weren't circumcised. God's solution seemed like military suicide: perform surgery on the entire army while surrounded by hostile nations. Chapter 5, verses 2 and 3 record God's unexpected command. At that time, the Lord said to Joshua, "Make flint knives and circumcise the Israelites again." So Joshua made flint knives and circumcised the Israelites at Gibeah Haraloth. The Hebrew name Gibeah Haraloth literally means hill of foreskins, showing just how massive this operation was. The reason for this requirement went back to the wilderness years. Verses 4 through 7 explain the situation. Now this is why he did so. All those who came out of Egypt, all the men of military age, died in the wilderness on the way after leaving Egypt. All the people that came out had been circumcised, but all the people born in the wilderness during the journey from Egypt had not been circumcised. The Israelites had moved about in the wilderness 40 years, until all the men who were of military age when they left Egypt had died, since they had not obeyed the Lord. This meant that the majority of Israel's fighting force was technically outside the covenant until this moment. They couldn't participate in Passover. They couldn't claim the full promises of God, and they weren't complete members of the covenant community. The circumcision had to happen before the conquest could begin, but the timing seemed terrible from a military standpoint. Verses 8 and 9 revealed just how vulnerable this made them. And after the whole nation had been circumcised, they remained where they were in camp until they were healed. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "Today I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you." So the place has been called Gilgal to this day. For several days, Israel's entire army was immobilized by pain and unable to fight. Any Canaanite king with basic intelligence could have wiped them out completely. But that was exactly God's point. Israel's protection didn't come from their military readiness. It came from their covenant relationship with Him. By requiring circumcision before conquest, God was teaching them that spiritual preparation was more important than physical. Preparation, the name Gilgal means to roll away, commemorating the moment when God removed the shame of Egypt from His people. They were no longer slaves or wanderers. They were covenant warriors ready to claim their inheritance. Joshua stood alone near Jericho, studying the massive walls that seemed to mock every military strategy he could imagine. The city looked impossible to conquer with conventional warfare. But as he surveyed the fortress, something extraordinary happened that would change everything. Chapter 5, verse 13 describes the moment. Now when Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. Joshua went up to him and asked, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" The figure appeared suddenly, armed and ready for battle. Joshua's first instinct was to determine whose side this mysterious warrior was on. The stranger's response in verse 14 shattered Joshua's assumptions. "Neither," he replied, "but as commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come." This wasn't a human general offering to join Israel's cause. This was the divine commander announcing that heaven itself had arrived to take charge of the operation. Joshua immediately understood the significance. The text continues, "Then Joshua fell face down to the ground in reverence and asked him, 'What message does my Lord have for his servant?'" The great military leader recognized that he was no longer the commanding officer. He was about to become a lieutenant in a heavenly army. The commander's next words in verse 15 revealed the sacred nature of this moment. "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy." The same command that Moses had received at the burning bush was now given to Joshua. Holy ground meant divine presence, and divine presence meant that ordinary rules no longer applied. This encounter completely reframed the conquest. Israel wasn't fighting to expand their territory or prove their military might. They were participating in a heavenly campaign where God Himself was the commanding general. The victory at Jericho wouldn't belong to human strategy or courage. It would demonstrate heaven's agenda for the promised land. Joshua learned that his role was to follow orders, not create strategy. The divine commander had come to execute a plan that was already perfect, and Joshua's job was simply to obey without question. The siege strategy that God gave Joshua for Jericho defied every principle of ancient warfare. Instead of battering rams, siege towers, or starvation tactics, the plan centered on sound, timing, and supernatural intervention. Chapter 6, verses 2 and 3 outline the divine battle plan. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "See, I have delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its king and its fighting men. March around the city once with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days." God spoke about the victory in past tense. It was already accomplished in heaven's realm, even though the walls still stood on earth. The specific instructions in verses 4 and 5 reveal the unique nature of this warfare. "Have 7 priests carry trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times. with the priests blowing the trumpets. When you hear them sound a long blast on the trumpets, have the whole army give a loud shout. Then the wall of the city will collapse and the army will go up, everyone straight in. This strategy made no military sense whatsoever. Armies don't conquer fortified cities by walking in circles and making noise. But God was demonstrating that his methods operate on completely different principles than human warfare. The repetitive marching would create psychological pressure on the defenders while building faith and anticipation among the Israelites. Joshua implemented the plan exactly as commanded. Verses 14 and 15 describe the process. So on the second day, they marched around the city once and returned to the camp. They did this for 6 days. On the seventh day, they got up at daybreak and marched around the city 7 times in the same manner, except that on that day, they circled the city 7 times. The acoustic element was crucial. The sound of thousands of marching feet, combined with the haunting blast of ram's horns, created an atmosphere of impending doom for Jericho's defenders. Each day, the tension mounted. Each circuit around the walls increased the psychological pressure. By the 7th day, both armies were ready for something dramatic to happen. The moment of truth came in verse 20. When the trumpets sounded, the army shouted, and at the sound of the trumpet, when the men gave a loud shout, the wall collapsed. So everyone charged straight in, and they took the city. The walls didn't crumble gradually. They fell instantly when heaven's timing was perfect. The collapse of Jericho's walls demonstrated something impossible by human standards: divine precision and destruction. The massive fortifications that had protected the city for generations fell flat, but one small section remained standing, exactly where it needed to for Rahab's salvation. The description in chapter 6, verse 20, reveals the totality of the destruction. The wall collapsed, so everyone charged straight in. The Hebrew phrase suggests that the walls fell outward and downward, creating ramps that allowed the Israelite army to charge directly into the city from every direction simultaneously. This wasn't a breach in one section. It was complete structural failure, but amid this total demolition, one house remained intact. Verses 22 and 23 record the miraculous preservation. Joshua said to the 2 men who had spied out the land, "Go into the prostitute's house and bring her out, and all who belong to her, in accordance with your oath to her." So the young men who had done the spying went in and brought out Rahab, her father and mother, her brothers and sisters, and all who belonged to her. They brought out her entire family and put them in a place outside the camp of Israel. The engineering impossibility of this selective destruction reveals divine control over physical forces. Massive stone walls, weighing thousands of tons, fell perfectly flat, except for the precise section where Rahab had hung the scarlet cord. The same power that caused the collapse also preserved the one structure that needed to survive. Verse 24 describes the complete destruction of everything else. Then they burned the whole city and everything in it. But they put the silver and gold and the articles of bronze and iron into the treasury of the Lord's house. Nothing was left standing except Rahab's section of the wall, demonstrating that God's promises are as reliable as his judgments. This selective demolition sent a clear message to every nation in Canaan. Israel's God could destroy with surgical precision. He wasn't a random force of nature. He was a divine engineer who could manipulate physical laws to accomplish his exact purposes. The physics of what happened at Jericho defied explanation by ancient engineering knowledge. Walls that massive don't simply fall flat unless every structural support fails simultaneously. Yet the power that accomplished this total destruction could also preserve one small house, proving that divine intervention operates with perfect precision. Victory at Jericho should have launched Israel into an unstoppable conquest. But everything came to a grinding halt because of one man's secret disobedience. Achan's hidden treasure created a security breach that nearly destroyed Israel's entire military campaign. God had given specific instructions about Jericho's wealth. Chapter 6, verses 18 and 19 contain the clear command, "But keep away from the devoted things, so that you will not bring about your own destruction by taking any of them. Otherwise, you will make the camp of Israel liable to destruction and bring trouble on it. All the silver and gold and the articles of bronze and iron are sacred to the Lord and must go into his treasury." But Achan saw an opportunity for personal gain. Chapter 7, verse 21 records his confession. "When I saw in the plunder a beautiful robe from Babylonia, 200 shekels of silver and a bar of gold weighing 50 shekels, I coveted them and took them. They are hidden in the ground inside my tent, with the silver underneath." The items he stole weren't just valuable, they were specifically dedicated to God. The consequences became apparent immediately at Israel's next battle. Verse 4 and 5 of chapter 7 describe the shocking defeat. "So about 3,000 went up, but they were routed by the men of Ai, who killed about 36 of them. They chased the Israelites from the city gate as far as the stone quarries and struck them down on the slopes. At this, the hearts of the people melted in fear and became like water. This defeat was devastating psychologically. Israel had just witnessed the miraculous fall of Jericho, but now a much smaller city had humiliated their army. The 36 deaths represented more than military casualties. They were evidence that something had broken Israel's divine protection. Joshua's response in verses 7 through 9 reveals his confusion and fear. "Alas, sovereign Lord, why did you ever bring this people across the Jordan to deliver us into the hands of the Amorites to destroy us? If only we had been content to stay on the other side of the Jordan. Pardon your servant, Lord, what can I say, now that Israel has been routed by its enemies? The Canaanites and the other people of the country will hear about this, and they will surround us and wipe out our name from the earth. What then will you do for your own great name?" God's answer was immediate and direct. Verse 11 explains the problem. Israel has sinned. "They have violated my covenant, which I commanded them to keep. They have taken some of the devoted things. They have stolen, they have lied. They have put them with their own possessions." The corporate consequences of individual disobedience had infected the entire nation. The defeat at Ai forced Israel to confront a harsh reality. God's presence didn't guarantee victory if his commands were ignored. But once the sin was dealt with, the lessons learned from this failure would transform Israel's military approach forever. After Achan's execution removed the spiritual barrier, God gave Joshua a second chance at Ai. Chapter 8. Verse 1 contains his reassurance. "Then the Lord said to Joshua, do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. Take the whole army with you and go up and attack Ai. For I have delivered into your hands the king of Ai, his people, his city, and his land." But this time, the strategy would be completely different. Verse 2 reveals God's new approach. "You shall do to Ai and its king as you did to Jericho and its king, except that you may carry off their plunder and livestock for yourselves. Set an ambush behind the city." God was teaching Israel to adapt their tactics while maintaining their dependence on divine guidance. The plan required sophisticated coordination between multiple units. Verses 3 through 8 outline the complex strategy. "So Joshua and the whole army moved out to attack Ai. He chose 30,000 of his best fighting men and sent them out at night with these orders. Listen carefully. You are to set an ambush behind the city. Don't go very far from it. All of you be on the alert. I and all those with me will advance on the city, and when the men come out against us, as they did before, we will flee from them. They will pursue us until we have lured them away from the city, for they will say, they are running away from us as they did before. So when we flee from them, you are to rise up from ambush and take the city. The Lord your God will give it into your hand. When you have taken the city, set it on fire." This plan required Israel to appear weak and defeated, deliberately triggering their enemy's confidence. It was psychological warfare combined with tactical brilliance. The army that fled from Ai the first time would now use that defeat as bait for a devastating trap. The execution was flawless. Verses 14 through 17 describe the deception's success. When the king of Ai saw this, he and all the men of the city hurried out early in the morning to meet Israel in battle at a certain place overlooking the Arabah. But he did not know that an ambush had been set against him behind the city. Joshua and all Israel let themselves be driven back before them, and they fled toward the wilderness. All the men of Ai were called to pursue them, and they pursued Joshua and were lured away from the city. Not a man remained in Ai or Bethel who did not go after Israel. They left the city open and went in pursuit of Israel. The victory that followed was total. Verses 24 through 26 record the complete destruction. When Israel had finished killing all the men of Ai in the fields and in the wilderness where they had chased them, and when every one of them had been put to the sword, all the Israelites returned to Ai and killed those who were in it. 12,000 men and women fell that day, all the people of Ai. For Joshua did not draw back, the hand that held out his javelin, until he had destroyed all who lived in Ai. The place where Achan died became known as the Valley of Achor, the Valley of Trouble. But what started as Israel's greatest disaster became the foundation for their most spectacular victories. God's method of dealing with sin created a protocol that would prevent future security breaches. Chapter 7, verses 24 through 26 describe the execution of justice. Then Joshua, together with all Israel, took Achan son of Zerah, the silver, the gold, the robe, his sons and daughters, his cattle, donkeys and sheep, his tent and all that he had, to the valley of Achor. Joshua said, "Why have you brought this trouble on us? The Lord will bring trouble on you today." Then all Israel stoned him, and after they had stoned the rest, they burned them. Over Achan they heaped up a large pile of rocks, which remains to this day. Then the Lord turned from his fierce anger. The severity of this punishment shocked everyone. Achan's entire family died with him, and all his possessions were destroyed. The message was unmistakable. Hidden disobedience affects more than just the individual. Secret sins have public consequences that can destroy entire communities. But the immediate result was the restoration of God's blessing. The very next verse, chapter 8, verse 1, shows the transformation. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. Take the whole army with you and go up and attack Ai. For I have delivered into your hands the king of Ai, his people, his city and his land." Fear and discouragement were replaced with divine confidence and clear direction. The Valley of Achor became a memorial to the cost of disobedience, but also to the possibility of restoration. The pile of stones over Achan's grave served as a permanent reminder that God's holiness demanded complete obedience, especially from leaders and representatives of his people. This experience established a new protocol for Israel's military operations. From this point forward, Joshua would never assume that previous victories guaranteed future success. Each battle would require fresh consultation with God and careful examination of the army's spiritual condition. The transformation was so complete that later, prophets would use the Valley of Achor as a symbol of hope. What had been a place of trouble would become a doorway to blessing for generations who learned from Israel's mistakes. While Israel was gaining confidence from their victory at Ai, the inhabitants of Gibeon were developing a plan that would outsmart God's chosen people through masterful deception. Their strategy would succeed where military resistance had failed. Chapter 9. Verse 3 sets up their scheme. However, when the people of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and Ai, they resorted to a ruse. Instead of preparing for war like other Canaanite cities, the Gibeonites chose deception as their survival strategy. Their plan was elaborate and convincing. Verses 4 through 6 describe the props they used. They went as a delegation whose donkeys were loaded with worn-out sacks and old wineskins, cracked and mended. They put worn and patched sandals on their feet and wore old clothes. All the bread of their food supply was dry and moldy. Then they went to Joshua in the camp at Gilgal and said to him and the Israelites, "We have come from a distant country. Make a treaty with us. The deception included a carefully crafted backstory. Verses 9 through 13 record their fictional travel narrative. They answered, "Your servants have come from a very distant country because of the fame of the Lord your God. For we have heard reports of him, all that he did in Egypt, and all that he did to the two kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, Sihon, king of Heshbon, and Og, king of Bashan, who reigned in Ashtaroth. And our elders and all those living in our country said to us, 'Take provisions for your journey. Go and meet them and say to them, "We are your servants. Make a treaty with us." This bread of ours was warm when we packed it at home on the day we left to come to you. But now see how dry and moldy it is. And these wine skins that we filled were new, but see how cracked they are. And our clothes and sandals are worn out by the very long journey." The Israelites fell for it completely. Verse 14 reveals their critical mistake. The Israelites sampled their provisions, but did not inquire of the Lord. They trusted their own judgment instead of seeking divine counsel. The physical evidence seemed convincing. The moldy bread, cracked wineskins, and worn clothing all supported the Gibeonites' story. Verse 15 records the fatal decision. Then Joshua made a treaty of peace with them to let them live, and the leaders of the assembly ratified it by oath. The treaty wasn't just a casual agreement, it was a binding oath sworn in God's name, making it impossible to break without severe consequences. The truth came out just 3 days later. Verses 16 and 17 reveal the devastating discovery. 3 days after they made the treaty with the Gibeonites, the Israelites heard that they were neighbors, living near them. So the Israelites set out, and on the 3rd day came to their cities, Gibeon, Kephirah, Beeroth, and Kiriath Jearim. The distant travelers lived just a few miles away from Israel's camp. The Gibeonite deception created a crisis that would plague Israel for generations. Joshua's failure to seek God's counsel before making the treaty had consequences that extended far beyond the immediate situation. When the deception was discovered, the Israelites' first instinct was to attack. Chapter 9, verse 18, describes their reaction. But the Israelites did not attack them, because the leaders of the assembly had sworn an oath to them by the Lord, the God of Israel. The whole assembly grumbled against the leaders. The people were furious that they had been tricked into making a treaty with enemies who should have been destroyed. But the leaders understood something crucial about oath-keeping. Verses 19 and 20 record their explanation. All the leaders answered, "We have given them our oath by the Lord, the God of Israel, and we cannot touch them now. This is what we will do to them. We will let them live, so that God's wrath will not fall on us for breaking the oath we swore to them." Breaking an oath sworn in. God's name would bring divine judgment on Israel. Joshua's solution was to honor the treaty while imposing consequences for the deception. Verses 21 through 23 reveal his decision. They continued, "Let them live, but let them be woodcutters and water carriers in service to the whole assembly." So the leader's promise to them was kept. Then Joshua summoned the Gibeonites and said, "Why did you deceive us by saying, 'We live a long way from you,' while actually you live near us? You are now under a curse. You will never be released from service as woodcutters and water carriers for the house of my God." The Gibeonites accepted this arrangement gladly. Verse 24 shows their relief. They answered Joshua, "Your servants were clearly told how the Lord your God had commanded his servant Moses to give you the whole land and to wipe out all its inhabitants from before you. So we feared for our lives because of you, and that is why we did this." Slavery was better than death, and they had achieved their primary goal of survival. But the long-term consequences were severe. This treaty would force Israel to defend Gibeon against other Canaanite kings, dragging them into conflicts they might have avoided. It would also create a permanent foreign population within Israel's territory, leading to future religious and political complications. The lesson was clear. Spiritual leaders must consult God before making major decisions, no matter how obvious the choice might seem. Human wisdom even when supported by apparent evidence, is no substitute for divine guidance. Joshua's mistake at Gibeon would serve as a warning to future generations about the cost of acting independently from God's counsel. The Gibeonite treaty had barely been signed when it triggered the largest military crisis Israel had ever faced. 5 powerful Canaanite kings realized that if Gibeon could make peace with Israel, other cities might follow, unraveling their entire defense network. Chapter 10, verse 1 describes the immediate reaction. Now Adoni-Zedek, king of Jerusalem, heard that Joshua had taken Ai and totally destroyed it, doing to Ai and its king as he had done to Jericho and its king, and that the people of Gibeon had made a treaty of peace with Israel and had become their allies. The king of Jerusalem understood that Gibeon's defection wasn't just a local problem, it was a strategic disaster that threatened every Canaanite stronghold. The fear was justified. Verse 2 reveals why Gibeon's surrender was so significant. He and his people were very much alarmed at this because Gibeon was an important city, like one of the royal cities. It was larger than Ai, and all its men were good fighters. If a major military power like Gibeon couldn't resist Israel, what hope did smaller cities have? Adoni-Zedek's solution was to create an overwhelming coalition. Verses 3 and 4 record his urgent message to neighboring kings. So Adoni-Zedek, king of Jerusalem, appealed to Hebron, king of Hebron, Piram, king of Jarmuth, Japhia, king of Lachish, and Debir, king of Eglon. Come up and help me attack Gibeon, he said, because it has made peace with Joshua and the Israelites. This wasn't just a punitive raid, it was a coordinated effort to destroy Gibeon as an example to other cities considering surrender. The response was immediate and massive. Verse 5 shows the scale of the threat. Then the 5 kings of the Amorites, the kings of Jerusalem, Hebron, Jarmuth, Lachish, and Eglon, joined forces. They moved up with all their troops and took up positions against Gibeon and attacked it. This represented the combined military might of southern Canaan, all focused on destroying Israel's newest ally. The attack put Israel in an impossible position. They were bound by treaty to defend Gibeon, but facing this coalition meant fighting the largest army they had ever encountered. The Gibeonites sent an urgent message recorded in verse 6. The Gibeonites then sent word to Joshua in the camp at Gilgal, "Do not abandon your servants. Come up to us quickly and save us. Help us, because all the Amorite kings from the hill country have joined forces against us." The very people who had deceived Israel into a treaty were now calling in that treaty for protection. Joshua faced a critical decision. Honoring the treaty meant risking Israel's entire army against overwhelming odds. But breaking their oath would destroy Israel's credibility and bring God's judgment. The emergency demanded immediate action with no time for lengthy consultation. What happened next defied every law of nature and became the most impossible prayer ever answered in human history. Joshua didn't just ask God for victory, he commanded the sun and moon to stop moving, and they obeyed. God's response to the crisis came before Joshua even had time to fully process the threat. Chapter 10, verse 8 records the divine assurance. The Lord said to Joshua, "Do not be afraid of them. I have given them into your hand. Not one of them will be able to withstand you." This wasn't conditional on Israel's performance. It was a guarantee of total victory. Joshua launched an immediate counterattack. Verse 9 describes the surprise assault. After an all-night march from Gilgal, Joshua took them by surprise. The coalition army had expected Israel to take days to organize a response. But Joshua's forces appeared at dawn, catching the enemy completely unprepared. The initial attack was devastating. Verse 10 reveals God's direct involvement. The Lord threw them into confusion before Israel, so Joshua and the Israelites defeated them completely at Gibeon. Israel pursued them along the road going up to Beth-horon and cut them down all the way to Azekah and Makkedah. This wasn't just military success, it was divine intervention. that turned a massive enemy army into a panicked mob. But as the day progressed, Joshua realized they needed more time to complete the victory. The fleeing enemies were escaping under cover of approaching darkness, and allowing them to regroup would waste this unprecedented opportunity. That's when Joshua made the most audacious prayer request in military history. Verses 12 and 13 record the impossible moment. On the day the Lord gave the Amorites over to Israel, Joshua said to the Lord in the presence of Israel, "Sun, stand still over Gibeon, and you, moon, over the valley of Ajalon." So the sun stood still and the moon stopped, till the nation avenged itself on its enemies. Joshua didn't whisper this prayer privately. He shouted it in front of the entire army, asking God to override the laws of physics. The universe obeyed. Verse 13 continues, "The sun stopped in the middle of the sky and delayed going down about a full day. For approximately 24 hours, the Earth's rotation ceased, giving Israel extended daylight to complete the most thorough military victory in ancient history." The text emphasizes the uniqueness of this miracle in verse 14. There has never been a day like it before or since. A day when the Lord listened to a human being. Surely the Lord was fighting for Israel. This wasn't just an answered prayer, it was God bending the laws of nature to accomplish his purposes through human partnership. While the supernatural daylight allowed Israel to pursue the fleeing armies, the 5 kings who had started this massive war found themselves trapped in a cave, setting up one of the most psychologically devastating public executions in ancient warfare. During the chaos of battle, the 5 coalition leaders had fled for their lives. Chapter 10, verse 16 describes their desperate attempt to hide. Now the 5 kings had fled and hidden in the cave at Makkedah. These men who had commanded thousands of soldiers were now cowering in darkness, hoping to escape the disaster they had created, but their hiding place was quickly discovered. Verse 17 records the report. When Joshua was told that the 5 kings had been found hiding in the cave at Makkedah, the news reached Joshua while he was still directing the pursuit of the enemy armies, giving him an opportunity to turn military victory into psychological dominance. Joshua's response revealed his strategic thinking. Verse 18 shows his priorities. He said, "Roll large rocks up to the mouth of the cave and post some men there to guard it." Instead of immediately executing the kings, Joshua sealed them in their hiding place while continuing the military operation. The psychological torture of waiting in darkness would be part of their punishment. The pursuit continued with devastating results. Verses 19 and 20 record the completeness of Israel's victory. But don't stop. Pursue your enemies. Attack them from the rear and don't let them reach their cities. For the Lord your God has given them into your hand. So Joshua and the Israelites defeated them completely. But a few survivors managed to reach their fortified cities. When the military campaign was finished, Joshua returned to deal with the trapped kings. Verse 22 contains his dramatic order. Joshua said, "Open the mouth of the cave and bring those 5 kings out to me." The moment had come for the public demonstration that would terrorize every remaining enemy in Canaan. The execution was carefully orchestrated for maximum psychological impact. Verses 24 through 26 describe the humiliation ritual when they had brought these kings to Joshua. He summoned all the men of Israel and said to the army commanders who had come with him, "Come here and put your feet on the necks of these kings." So they came forward and placed their feet on their necks. Joshua said to them, "Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. Be strong and courageous. This is what the Lord will do to all the enemies you are going to fight." After this, Joshua put the kings to death and exposed their bodies on 5 poles. And they were left hanging on the poles until evening. This public execution served multiple purposes. It demonstrated Israel's complete dominance over their enemies, boosted the confidence of Israeli soldiers, and sent a clear message to every remaining Canaanite city: Resistance was futile. The victory over the five-king alliance created unstoppable momentum that transformed Israel's military strategy. Instead of slow, methodical sieges, Joshua launched a rapid campaign that conquered 7 major cities in quick succession. The Blitzkrieg began immediately after the Makkedah executions. Chapter 10, verse 28 records the first target. That day Joshua took Makkedah. He put the city and its king to the sword and totally destroyed everyone in it. He left no survivors, and he did to the king of Makkedah as he had done to the king of Jericho. The pattern was established: complete conquest with no mercy for rulers who had resisted God's people. From Makkedah, the army moved to Libnah. Verses 29 and 30 describe the second victory. Then Joshua and all Israel with him moved on from Makkedah to Libnah and attacked it. The Lord also gave that city and its king into Israel's hand. The city and everyone in it Joshua put to the sword. He left no survivors there, and he did to its king as he had done to the king of Jericho. The speed of conquest was possible because enemy resistance had already been broken psychologically. The third target fell just as quickly. Verses 31 and 32 record Lachish's defeat. Then Joshua and all Israel with him moved on from Libnah to Lachish. He took up positions against it and attacked it. The Lord gave Lachish into Israel's hands, and Joshua took it on the second day. The city and everyone in it he put to the sword, just as he had done to Libnah. Even fortified cities that should have required months of siege warfare were falling within days. An attempted rescue mission only added to Israel's momentum. Verses 33 through 35 describe how even allied reinforcements became additional victories. Meanwhile, Horam, king of Giza, had come up to help Lachish, but Joshua defeated him and his army until no survivors were left. Then Joshua and all Israel with him moved on from Lachish to Eglon. They took up positions against it and attacked it. They captured it that same day and put it to the sword and totally destroyed everyone in it, just as they had done to Lachish. The campaign continued with relentless efficiency. Verses 36 through 39 record the conquest of Hebron and Debir. Then Joshua and all Israel with him went up from Eglon to Hebron and attacked it. They took the city and put it and its king and its villages and everyone in it to the sword. They left no survivors. Just as at Eglon, they totally destroyed it and everyone in it. Then Joshua and all Israel with him turned around and attacked Debir. They took the city, its king and its villages and put them to the sword. Everyone in it they totally destroyed. They left no survivors. They did to Debir and its king as they had done to Libnah and its king and to Hebron. The speed and completeness of this campaign was unprecedented in ancient warfare. Verse 40 summarizes the strategic achievement. So Joshua subdued the whole region, including the hill country, the Negev, the western foothills and the mountain slopes, together with all their kings. He left no survivors. He totally destroyed all who breathed, just as the Lord, the God of Israel, had commanded. Among all the enemies Israel faced, none struck fear into their hearts like the Anakim, the giant clans whose very presence had once convinced an entire generation to refuse God's promises. But now Joshua systematically hunted down these legendary warriors, proving that no enemy was too terrifying for God's people. The Anakim had a fearsome reputation that stretched back 40 years. These were the giants that the original 12 spies had encountered, causing 10 of them to declare in Numbers 13:33, "We saw the Nephilim there, the descendants of Anak. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." Their size and strength had become a symbol of impossible obstacles in Israel's path. But Joshua's approach to the Anakim was methodical and deliberate. Chapter 11, verse 21 describes his systematic campaign. At that time, Joshua went and destroyed the Anakites from the hill country, from Hebron, Debir and Anab, from all the hill country of Judah, and from all the hill country of Israel. Joshua totally destroyed them and their towns. This wasn't random warfare. It was a targeted elimination of specific giant strongholds. The significance of conquering Hebron cannot be overstated. This was the ancestral home of the Anakim, their primary fortress and breeding ground. When Joshua conquered Hebron, he was striking at the heart of giant territory. The psychological impact on both Israel and their enemies was enormous. Verse 22 reveals the thoroughness of the giant elimination. No Anakites were left in Israelite territory. Only in Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod did any survive. Joshua's campaign had reduced the once terrifying giant clans to small remnants in Philistine cities. The monsters that had haunted Israel's nightmares for 40 years were nearly extinct. The strategic importance of eliminating the Anakim went beyond their individual threat. These giants had served as the ultimate psychological weapon for Israel's enemies. Cities would hire Anakim warriors as mercenaries, knowing that their mere presence would terrorize opposing armies. By systematically destroying the giant clans, Joshua was removing Canaan's most powerful deterrent against Israeli conquest. The elimination of the Anakim also fulfilled a specific promise that God had made to Caleb 45 years earlier. When Caleb had been one of only 2 spies to advocate conquering the land despite the giants, God had promised him the very territory where the Anakim lived. Now Joshua was making good on that ancient promise, proving that God's word remains reliable regardless of how much time passes. This campaign demonstrated that faith in God could overcome any obstacle, no matter how intimidating it appeared. The same giants who had once caused an entire generation to doubt God's power were now being systematically destroyed by the next generation who chose to trust divine promises over human fears. The systematic dismantling of Canaanite political power reached its climax, with the defeat of 31 independent kings, representing the complete collapse of organized resistance in the Promised Land. This wasn't just military conquest, it was the destruction of an entire political system. Chapter 12 provides the comprehensive catalogue of defeated rulers, beginning with the victories east of the Jordan under Moses' leadership. Verses 1 through 6 list the preliminary conquests. These are the kings of the land whom the Israelites had defeated and whose territory they took over east of the Jordan. From the Arnon Gorge to Mount Hermon, including all the eastern side of the Arabah, Sihon, king of the Amorites, who reigned in Heshbon, or king of Bashan, one of the last of the Rephates, who reigned in Ashtaroth and Edrei. But the main catalogue focuses on Joshua's conquests west of the Jordan. Verses 7 and 8 introduce the list. These are the kings of the land that Joshua and the Israelites conquered on the west side of the Jordan, from Baal-Gad in the valley of Lebanon to Mount Halak, which rises towards Seir. Joshua gave their lands as an inheritance to the tribes of Israel, according to their tribal divisions. The list that follows reads like a roll call of ancient Near Eastern power. Verses 9 through 24 methodically name each defeated ruler. The king of Jericho, 1. The king of Ai near Bethel, 1. The king of Jerusalem, 1. The king of Hebron, 1. The king of Jarmuth, 1. The king of Lachish, 1. The king of Eglon, 1. The king of Gaza, 1. The king of Debir, 1. The king of Geder, 1. The king of Hormah, 1. The king of Arad, 1. The king of Libnah, 1. The king of Adullam, 1. The king of Makkedah, 1. The king of Bethel, 1. The king of Tappuah, 1. The king of Hepher, 1. The king of Aphek, 1. The king of Lasharon, 1. The king of Maden, 1. The king of Hazor, 1. The king of Shimron-Meron, 1. The king of Akshaph, 1. The king of Tanakh, 1. The king of Megiddo, 1. The king of Kadesh, 1. The king of Jokneam in Carmel, 1. The king of Dor in Naphoth Dor, 1. The king of Goyim in Gilgal, 1. The king of Tirzah, 1. 31 kings in all. Each name on this list represented a complete political entity with its own army, fortifications, and sphere of influence. These weren't minor chieftains or tribal leaders. They were the established rulers of fortified cities that controlled trade routes, agricultural regions, and strategic military positions throughout Canaan. The geographic spread of these conquests was remarkable. The defeated kings controlled territory from the southern desert to the northern mountains, from the Mediterranean coast to the Jordan Valley. No region of the Promised Land remained under independent Canaanite control. The systematic nature of these victories revealed divine strategy at work. Rather than leaving pockets of organized resistance that could regroup and counterattack, Joshua had methodically eliminated every center of political power. The 31 defeats represented the complete decapitation of Canaanite civilization in the Promised Land. This catalogue served as permanent testimony to God's faithfulness in fulfilling his promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Every name on the list was proof that divine power had overcome human resistance, that heavenly purposes had triumphed over earthly opposition. The northern Canaanite kings realized that isolated resistance was futile, so they formed the largest military alliance in the region's history. Led by Jabin, king of Hazor, this confederacy represented the final, desperate attempt to stop Israel's conquest through overwhelming force. Chapter 11, verse 1 describes the formation of this mega-alliance. When Jabin, king of Hazor, heard of this, he sent word to Jobab, king of Madon, to the kings of Shimron and Akshaph. Hazor was the most powerful city-state in northern Canaan, making Jabin the natural leader for organizing regional resistance against Israel. The scope of this coalition was unprecedented. Verses 2 and 3 reveal its massive scale. And to the northern kings who were in the mountains, in the Arabah south of Kinnereth, in the western foothills, and in Naphoth Dor on the west. To the Canaanites in the east and west. To the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, and Jebusites in the hill country. And to the Hivites below Hermon in the region of Mizpah. This wasn't just a local alliance, it represented virtually every remaining independent power in northern and central Canaan. The military force that assembled was staggering. Verse 4 describes the army. They came out with all their troops and a large number of horses and chariots, a huge army, as numerous as the sand on the seashore. This was the largest military force ever assembled against Israel, combining the professional armies of dozens of kingdoms into one massive war machine. The technological advantage seemed overwhelming. The Confederacy's cavalry and chariot forces represented the most advanced military technology of the ancient world. Against Israel's infantry army, these mobile units should have been decisive. The psychological impact alone was intended to break Israeli morale before the battle even began. The armies met at the waters of Merom, a strategic location that favored the Confederacy's mobile forces. Verse 5 records the confrontation. All these kings joined forces and made camp together at the waters of Merom to fight against Israel. The battlefield was chosen to maximize the effectiveness of chariots and cavalry, while minimizing Israel's advantages, but God had already determined the outcome. Verse 6 contains his promise to Joshua. The Lord said to Joshua, "Do not be afraid of them, because by this time tomorrow I will hand all of them, slain, over to Israel. You are to hamstring their horses and burn their chariots." The advanced technology that seemed so intimidating to human eyes was worthless against divine intervention. The battle was decisive and complete. Verses 7 and 8 record the victory. So Joshua and his whole army came against them suddenly at the waters of Merom and attacked them, and the Lord gave them into the hand of Israel. They defeated them and pursued them all the way to Greater Sidon, to Misrephoth-Maim, and to the valley of Mizpah on the east, until no survivors were left. The largest army ever assembled against Israel was completely destroyed. The destruction of the Confederacy's advanced military technology marked a crucial turning point in ancient warfare philosophy. God's instructions to destroy rather than capture the enemy's chariots and horses revealed a deliberate strategy to keep Israel dependent on divine power rather than human innovation. After the victory at the waters of Merom, Joshua faced a decision about the massive amount of captured military equipment. The practical choice would have been to incorporate the chariots and horses into Israel's own army, instantly transforming them into the most powerful military force in the region. But God's instructions in chapter 11, verse 6 were specific and non-negotiable. You are to hamstring their horses and burn their chariots. This command required Joshua to deliberately destroy valuable military assets that could have strengthened Israel's army for future battles. Joshua obeyed without hesitation. Verse 9 records his implementation. Joshua did to them as the Lord had directed. He hamstrung their horses and burned their chariots. The systematic destruction of advanced technology demonstrated that Israel's victories came from divine power, not superior equipment. The hamstringing of horses was particularly significant. This procedure permanently disabled the animals for military use while keeping them alive for agricultural work. It sent a clear message that Israel rejected the military advantages that other nations depended on for their security. The burning of chariots was equally symbolic. These vehicles represented the pinnacle of ancient military technology, requiring significant resources and expertise to build and maintain. By destroying them, Israel was rejecting the temptation to trust in human engineering rather than divine protection. This technology neutralization strategy had profound implications for Israel's military philosophy. While other nations invested heavily in weapons development and technological superiority, Israel was learning to depend entirely on their covenant relationship with God. Their strength came from obedience, not innovation. The destruction of captured military technology also prevented Israel from becoming dependent on equipment they couldn't manufacture or maintain themselves. Chariots required specialized knowledge, trained personnel, and ongoing resources that Israel lacked. By destroying them, Joshua was avoiding future military vulnerabilities. The psychological impact on surrounding nations was enormous. Israel had just destroyed the most advanced military technology in the ancient world, proving that they possessed something more powerful than horses and chariots. This demonstration of confidence in divine power, rather than human technology, became a defining characteristic of Israel's national identity. The chariot burning at Merom established a precedent that would influence Israel's military strategy for generations. It proved that dependence on God was more reliable than dependence on technology, that faith was more powerful than firepower, and that divine intervention was more decisive than human innovation. As the major military campaigns ended, a puzzling reality emerged. God had deliberately left the conquest unfinished. Scattered throughout the Promised Land, pockets of Canaanite populations remained unconquered. And this wasn't due to Israel's failure. It was part of God's long-term development plan. Chapter 13, verse 1 reveals God's perspective on the situation. When Joshua had grown old, the Lord said to him, "You are now very old, and there are still very large areas of land to be taken over." This wasn't a criticism of Joshua's leadership or a complaint about incomplete military operations. God was simply stating a fact about the current territorial situation. The extent of remaining unconquered territory was substantial. Verses 2 through 6 provide a detailed catalogue. This is the land that remains, all the regions of the Philistines and Geshurites, from the Shihor River on the east of Egypt to the territory of Ekron on the north. All of it counted as Canaanite, though held by the 5 Philistine rulers in Gaza, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gath, and Ekron, the territory of the Avites on the south. All the land of the Canaanites, from Arah of the Sidonians as far as Aphek and the border of the Amorites, the area of Byblos, and all Lebanon to the east, from Baal-Gad below Mount Hermon to Lebo-Hamath. But God had a specific reason for this incomplete conquest. The strategy wasn't about military limitations, it was about Israel's gradual development as a nation. These remaining populations would serve as training opponents, helping each tribe develop their own military capabilities and territorial control over time. The divine plan also included a promise for future completion. Verse 6 contains God's commitment. As for all the inhabitants of the mountain regions from Lebanon to Misrephoth-Maim, that is, all the Sidonians, I myself will drive them out before the Israelites. Be sure to allocate this land to Israel for an inheritance. As I have instructed you, the conquest would continue, but at God's timing, and through each tribe's individual efforts, this incomplete conquest served multiple purposes in Israel's national development. It prevented them from becoming complacent after their initial victories, maintained their dependence on God for ongoing success, and ensured that each generation would have to actively claim their inheritance, rather than simply inheriting completed territories. The strategy also revealed God's understanding of human nature and organizational capacity. A nation that had been slaves in Egypt and nomads in the wilderness needed time to develop the administrative skills, agricultural knowledge, and social structures necessary to govern conquered territories effectively. Gradual expansion would allow for sustainable growth rather than overwhelming responsibilities. While the general conquest remained incomplete, one remarkable individual was ready to claim his personal inheritance immediately. Caleb, now 85 years old, approached Joshua with a bold request that would become one of the most inspiring stories of faith and determination in Israel's history. Chapter 14, verse 6 sets the scene. Now the people of Judah approached Joshua at Gilgal, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite, said to him. Caleb wasn't making this request privately. He spoke publicly before the entire tribe of Judah, demonstrating his confidence in both his claim and his ability to fulfill it. Caleb's speech began by reminding Joshua of their shared history. Verses 7 and 8 contain his testimony. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to explore the land. And I brought him back a report according to my convictions. But my fellow Israelites, who went up with me, made the hearts of the people melt in fear. I, however, followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. This wasn't boasting, it was establishing the foundation for his current request. The promise that Caleb was claiming dated back 45 years. Verse 9 records Moses' original commitment. So on that day, Moses swore to me, the land on which your feet have walked will be your inheritance, and that of your children forever, because you have followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. The specific territory Caleb had explored as a spy was promised to him as a permanent inheritance, but the most remarkable part of Caleb's request was his assessment of his current physical condition. Verses 10 and 11 contain his confident declaration. Now then, just as the Lord promised, he has kept me alive for 45 years since the time he said this to Moses, while Israel moved about in the wilderness. So here I am today, 85 years old. I'm still as strong today as the day Moses sent me out. I'm just as vigorous to go out to battle now as I was then. Caleb's specific request was for the most challenging territory available. Verse 12 reveals his bold choice. Now give me this hill country that the Lord promised me that day. You yourself heard then that the Anakites were there and their cities were large and fortified, but the Lord helping me, I will drive them out just as he said. Most people his age would have requested peaceful, easily managed territory. But Caleb specifically wanted the mountains where giants lived. Joshua's response was immediate and positive. Verse 13 records the grant. Then Joshua blessed Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and gave him Hebron as his inheritance. There was no discussion, no committee review, no strategic analysis, just the recognition that Caleb had earned this inheritance through 45 years of faithful service. The result was exactly what Caleb had promised. Verse 14 states the outcome. So Hebron has belonged to Caleb, son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, ever since, because he followed the Lord, the God of Israel, wholeheartedly. The 85-year-old warrior successfully drove out the giants and claimed his mountain inheritance, proving that faith and determination can overcome any obstacle regardless of age. The distribution of the Promised Land among 12 tribes required a sophisticated system that balanced multiple factors: geography, population, economic potential, and strategic considerations. This wasn't random allocation. It was a carefully designed blueprint for national organization. Chapter 14, verse 1 describes the systematic approach. Now these are the areas the Israelites received as an inheritance in the land of Canaan, which Eleazar the priest, Joshua son of Nun, and the heads of the tribal clans of Israel allotted to them. The distribution process involved both religious and military leadership, ensuring that spiritual and practical considerations were properly balanced. The mathematical foundation was established by divine command. Verse 2 explains the method. Their inheritances were assigned by lot to the 9.5 tribes, as the Lord had commanded through Moses. The use of lots wasn't gambling. It was a recognized method for determining God's will in important decisions. This removed human favoritism and political maneuvering from the allocation process. The baseline for distribution had been set during the wilderness years. Numbers 26 had established that tribal inheritance would be proportional to population size, with larger tribes receiving more territory and smaller tribes receiving less. This ensured that each family would have adequate land for agricultural development and economic sustainability. Geographic considerations also played a crucial role in the blueprint. Coastal tribes would have access to maritime trade and fishing. Mountain tribes would control strategic passes and defensive positions. Valley tribes would enjoy fertile agricultural land, and border tribes would serve as buffers against foreign invasion. Each location offered different advantages and responsibilities. The inheritance system created a balance between tribal autonomy and national unity. Each tribe would govern its own territory according to the law of Moses, but all would remain part of the larger covenant community. This federal structure allowed for local adaptation while maintaining national cohesion. Economic factors were carefully considered in the distribution. Tribes with smaller populations received territory with higher economic potential, while larger tribes received more extensive but sometimes less valuable land. This mathematical balancing ensured that no tribe would be economically disadvantaged by the allocation process. The blueprint also included provisions for future growth and development. Tribal boundaries were designed with expansion in mind, allowing growing populations to spread into adjacent unconquered territories. This forward-thinking approach anticipated demographic changes and provided flexibility for future territorial adjustments. Strategic military considerations influenced the placement of certain tribes. Judah's position in the south provided defense against Egyptian threats, while northern tribes would guard against Mesopotamian invasions. Border tribes were expected to serve as early warning systems and first lines of defense for the entire nation. Among all the tribal inheritances, Judah received the most extensive and strategically significant territory, establishing a foundation for future political and spiritual leadership that would span centuries of Israel's history. Chapter 15, verse 1 establishes the scope of Judah's inheritance, the allotment for the tribe of Judah, according to its clans, extended down to the territory of Edom, to the desert of Zin in the extreme south. This southern positioning placed Judah as the primary buffer against threats from Egypt and other southern powers. The detailed boundary descriptions in verses 2 through 4 reveal the extent of Judah's territory. Their southern boundary started from the bay at the southern end of the Dead Sea, crossed south of Scorpion Pass, continued on to Zin, and went over to the south of Kadesh Barnea. Then it ran past Hezron up to Adar and curved around to Karka. It then passed along to Asmon and joined the Wadi of Egypt, ending at the Mediterranean Sea. This is their southern boundary. The eastern boundary was equally significant. Verse 5 describes Judah's control of strategic Dead Sea access. The eastern boundary is the Dead Sea, as far as the mouth of the Jordan. The northern boundary started from the Bay of the Sea at the mouth of the Jordan. This positioning gave Judah control over important trade routes and natural resources. The western boundary provided access to Mediterranean commerce. The end of verse 5 states, "and ended at the Mediterranean Sea." This is the boundary around the people of Judah by their clans. Coastal access meant that Judah could participate in international trade while maintaining agricultural self-sufficiency. In the inland regions, the territorial allocation included numerous significant cities. Verses 21 through 32 provide a partial catalogue. The southernmost towns of the tribe of Judah in the Negev toward the boundary of Edom were Kabzeel, Eder, Jagur, Kina, Dimona, Adada, Kadesh, Hazor, Ithnan, Ziph, Telem, Biloth, Hazor Hadata, Kerioth Hezron, that is Hazer, Amam, Shema, Molada, Hazar-Gadah, Heshmon, Bet-Pelet, Hazar-Shual, Beer-Sheba, Pitziothia, Baala, Im, Ezem, Eltolad, Kesil, Hormah. Each city represented economic and military assets that strengthened Judah's position. The inheritance also included Jerusalem, though this crucial city remained unconquered initially. Verse 63 acknowledges this incomplete occupation. Judah could not dislodge the Jebusites, who were living in Jerusalem. To this day, the Jebusites live there with the people of Judah. This temporary limitation would eventually be resolved under David's leadership. Judah's territorial supremacy wasn't just about size. It was about strategic positioning that would support future national leadership. The tribe's location provided access to international trade routes, defensive advantages against foreign invasion, and sufficient agricultural resources to support a large population. This territorial foundation would enable Judah to emerge as Israel's dominant tribe and provide the royal line that would ultimately produce the Messiah. The allocation of territory to Joseph's two sons created a unique situation in Israel's tribal structure. Instead of receiving one inheritance like the other sons of Jacob, Joseph received a double portion through Ephraim and Manasseh. But this blessing also generated complex territorial politics that would influence Israel's future. Chapter 16, verse 1 establishes the general location of Joseph's inheritance. The allotment for Joseph began at the Jordan, east of the waters of Jericho, and went up from there through the desert, into the hill country of Bethel. This central positioning placed Joseph's descendants in some of the most fertile and strategically important territory in the promised land. The specific boundaries of Ephraim's territory are detailed in verses 5 through 10. This was the territory of Ephraim, according to its clans. The boundary of their inheritance went from Ataroth Adar in the east to Upper Beth Horon on the west. From there it went toward the sea. From Mikmethath on the north, it curved eastward to Tunath Shiloh, passing by it to Janoah on the east. Then it went down from Janoah to Ataroth and Naarah, touched Jericho, and came out at the Jordan. From Tappuah, the border went west to the Kanah ravine and ended at the Mediterranean Sea. This was the inheritance of the tribe of the Ephraimites, according to their clans. It also included all the towns and their villages that were set aside for the Ephraimites within the inheritance of the Manassites. Manasseh's inheritance was more complex, spanning both sides of the Jordan River. Chapter 17, verse 1 describes the unusual arrangement. This was the allotment for the tribe of Manasseh as Joseph's firstborn. That is, for Machir, Manasseh's firstborn. Machir was the ancestor of the Gileadites, who had received Gilead and Bashan because the Machirites were great soldiers. Half of Manasseh had already received territory east of the Jordan under Moses' leadership. The western portion of Manasseh's inheritance created territorial complications. Verses 7 through 10 detail the boundaries. The territory of Manasseh extended from Asher to Mikmethath, east of Shechem. The boundary ran southward from there to include the people living at En Tappuah. Manasseh had the land of Tappuah, but Tappuah itself, on the boundary of Manasseh, belonged to the Ephraimites. Then the boundary continued south to the Kana ravine. There were towns belonging to Ephraim lying among the towns of Manasseh. But the boundary of Manasseh was the northern side of the ravine and ended at the Mediterranean Sea. On the south, the land belonged to Ephraim, on the north to Manasseh. The territory of Manasseh reached the Mediterranean Sea and bordered Asher on the north and Issachar on the east. The double portion arrangement created immediate territorial disputes. The descendants of Joseph felt their allocation was insufficient for their population size. Verses 14 through 16 record their complaint. The people of Joseph said to Joshua, "Why have you given us only one allotment and one portion for an inheritance? We are a numerous people, and the Lord has blessed us abundantly, if you are so numerous." Joshua answered, "And if the hill country of Ephraim is too small for you, go up into the forest and clear land for yourselves there, in the land of the Perizzites and Rephaites." But the Joseph tribes had concerns about the assigned territory. Verse 16 reveals their objection. The people of Joseph replied, "The hill country is not enough for us, and all the Canaanites who live in the plain have chariots fitted with iron, both those in Bethshan and its settlements and those in the valley of Jezreel." They wanted additional territory without having to fight for it. Joshua's response challenged them to live up to their privileged status. Verses 17 and 18 contain his directive, but Joshua said to the tribes of Joseph, to Ephraim and Manasseh, "You are numerous and very powerful. You will have not only one allotment but the forested hill country as well. Clear it and its farthest limits will be yours. Though the Canaanites have chariots fitted with iron, and though they are strong, you can drive them out." The double portion came with double responsibility to fully claim their inheritance. After Judah, Ephraim and Manasseh had received their inheritances. 7 tribes remained without territorial assignments. Their delayed allocation revealed both procrastination and the need for more systematic distribution methods to complete the land division process. Chapter 18. Verse 1 describes the gathering for final distribution. The whole assembly of the Israelites gathered at Shiloh and set up the tent of meeting there. The country was brought under their control. Shiloh became the new central location for national administration, replacing the temporary camps that had served during the conquest phase. But Joshua discovered that 7 tribes had been passive about claiming their inheritances. Verse 2 reveals the problem, but there were still 7 Israelite tribes who had not yet received their inheritance. These tribes had been living in temporary settlements, apparently content to avoid the work and risk involved in conquering their assigned territories. Joshua's response was direct and challenging. Verse 3 contains his pointed question. So Joshua said to the Israelites, "How long will you wait before you begin to take possession of the land that the Lord, the God of your fathers, has given you?" The delay wasn't due to military obstacles or administrative complications. It was simply procrastination and lack of initiative. The solution was to create a more systematic distribution process. Verses 4 through 6 outline Joshua's plan. Appoint 3 men from each tribe. I will send them out to make a survey of the land and to write a description of it, according to the inheritance of each. Then they will return to me. You are to divide the land into 7 parts. Judah is to remain in its territory on the south, and the tribes of Joseph in their territory on the north. After you have written descriptions of the 7 parts of the land, bring them here to me, and I will cast lots for you in the presence of the Lord our God. The surveying commission began their work immediately. Verse 8 records their departure. As the men started on their way to map out the land, Joshua instructed them, "Go and make a survey of the land and write a description of it. Then return to me, and I will cast lots for you here at Shiloh in the presence of the Lord." This systematic approach would eliminate favoritism and ensure fair distribution. The survey results provided the basis for final allocation. Verse 9 describes their return. So the men left and went through the land. They wrote its description on a scroll, town by town, in 7 parts, and returned to Joshua in the camp at Shiloh. The written survey created an objective foundation for territorial assignments. The distribution ceremony was conducted with appropriate solemnity. Verse 10 records the process. Joshua then cast lots for them in Shiloh, in the presence of the Lord, and there he distributed the land to the Israelites according to their tribal divisions. The use of lots ensured that God's will, rather than human preference, determined each tribe's inheritance. Benjamin received the first allocation from this final distribution. Verses 11 through 28 provide detailed boundary descriptions. The lot came up for the tribe of Benjamin according to its clans. Their allotted territory lay between the tribes of Judah and Joseph. The tribe of Benjamin, according to its clans, had the following towns: Jericho, Beth Hogla, Emek Keziz, Beth Arabah, Zimaraim, Bethel, Avim, Parah, Ophrah, Kephar Ammoni, Ophni and Geba, 12 towns and their villages. Gibeon, Ramah, Beeroth, Mizpah, Kephirah, Moza, Rechem, Irpil, Tarala, Zelah, Haleph, the Jebusite city, that is Jerusalem, Gibeah and Kiriath, 14 towns and their villages. This was the inheritance of Benjamin for its clans. The remaining 6 tribes would receive their inheritances through this same systematic process, ensuring that every Israelite family had a permanent place in the Promised Land. The decision to establish the tabernacle at Shiloh represented more than just choosing a convenient administrative center. This location became the spiritual heart of Israel's national life, influencing worship patterns and religious unity for generations. The selection of Shiloh was both practical and symbolic. Located in the territory of Ephraim, it was centrally positioned for access by all 12 tribes. The site offered adequate space for the tabernacle complex and the large gatherings that would be required for national festivals and religious ceremonies. Chapter 18, verse 1 marks this significant transition. The whole assembly of the Israelites gathered at Shiloh and set up the tent of meeting there. The country was brought under their control. The phrase "brought under their control" indicates that the major military campaigns were complete, allowing for the establishment of permanent religious institutions. The tabernacle's placement at Shiloh created a new pattern for Israel's religious life. Instead of following the mobile sanctuary through wilderness wanderings, the people would now make regular pilgrimages to a fixed location. This change required adjustments in worship practices and religious education. The centralization of worship at Shiloh had important implications for national unity. All 12 tribes would gather at the same location for major festivals, creating opportunities for intertribal communication, trade, and cooperation. These regular assemblies would help maintain Israel's identity as a single covenant community despite tribal autonomy. The economic impact of establishing the tabernacle at Shiloh was significant. The constant presence of priests and Levites created demand for housing, food, and services. Regular pilgrimages brought visitors from throughout Israel, stimulating local commerce and establishing Shiloh as a major economic center. The educational function of the Shiloh tabernacle was equally important. The concentration of religious leadership provided opportunities for training new priests and Levites, maintaining accurate copies of the law, and developing standardized religious practices that could be implemented throughout Israel. The strategic positioning of the tabernacle also served military purposes. Shiloh's central location made it easier to mobilize tribal militias for national defense. The presence of the Ark of the Covenant provided both spiritual and psychological advantages in warfare, as enemies would have to advance toward Israel's most sacred site. The establishment at Shiloh represented a transition from conquest to settlement, from military campaign to civil administration. The fixed tabernacle symbolized that Israel had successfully claimed their inheritance and was ready to develop permanent institutions for governing the Promised Land. The mapping and measurement of Israel's tribal territories required sophisticated techniques that represented some of the most advanced geographical and mathematical knowledge of the ancient world. This surveying commission created the foundation for accurate boundary determination and future dispute resolution. The surveying project began with careful personnel selection. Chapter 18, verse 4 describes Joshua's requirements. Appoint 3 men from each tribe. I will send them out to make a survey of the land and to write a description of it. According to the inheritance of each, the selection of 3 men per tribe ensured both accuracy through multiple perspectives and fair representation of tribal interests. The commission received specific instructions for their work. Verse 8 records Joshua's detailed directions. As the men started on their way to map out the land, Joshua instructed them, "Go and make a survey of the land and write a description of it. Then return to me, and I will cast lots for you here at Shiloh in the presence of the Lord." The written documentation would provide permanent records for boundary disputes and administrative purposes. The surveying techniques involved multiple measurement methods. Ancient surveying required knowledge of geometry, astronomy, and geography. The commissioners would have used standardized measurement units, astronomical observations for direction, finding, and geographical landmarks for reference points. The scope of the project was enormous. Verse 9 reveals the comprehensiveness of their work. So the men left and went through the land. They wrote its description on a scroll, town by town in 7 parts, and returned to Joshua in the camp at Shiloh. Documenting every town and geographical feature required months of careful fieldwork across hundreds of square miles. The written documentation created permanent territorial records. The scroll format allowed for easy copying and distribution, ensuring that multiple copies of boundary descriptions would be available for future reference. This documentation system prevented territorial disputes based on faulty memory or conflicting oral traditions. The mathematical precision required for this project demonstrates Israel's advanced technical capabilities. Accurate land division required precise measurement of distances, calculation of areas, and mapping of irregular boundaries. The surveying commission had to possess skills comparable to professional engineers and cartographers. The integration of geographical and legal information created a comprehensive territorial database. Each tribal inheritance included not only boundary descriptions, but also lists of included cities, economic resources, and strategic considerations. This information system supported both administrative governance and military planning. The Surveying Commission's work established precedents for future territorial administration. The documentation methods, measurement standards, and dispute resolution procedures developed for the initial land distribution would serve Israel's territorial management needs for centuries to come. Throughout the entire conquest and land distribution process, Joshua had focused entirely on everyone else's inheritance while neglecting his own. But after all the tribes had received their territories, the nation finally turned its attention to rewarding their faithful leader. Chapter 19, verse 49 describes the moment when Israel remembered their obligation. When they had finished dividing the land into its allotted portions, the Israelites gave Joshua, son of Nun, an inheritance among them. This wasn't an afterthought. It was a deliberate recognition of Joshua's selfless service throughout the conquest campaigns. The location Joshua chose reveals much about his character. Verse 50 records his humble request. As the Lord had commanded, they gave him the town he asked for, Timnath-Serah, in the hill country of Ephraim, and he built up the town and settled there. Instead of claiming prime agricultural land or a strategic commercial center, Joshua selected a modest town in the mountains of his own tribal territory. The name Timnath-Serah means portion of abundance, suggesting that Joshua found his greatest wealth not in material possessions, but in the satisfaction of completing God's assignment. The hill country location was challenging terrain that required significant development work, but it offered the privacy and simplicity that Joshua preferred after decades of public leadership. The building project that followed demonstrated Joshua's hands-on approach to development. The text states that he built up the town, indicating that Joshua personally invested in developing the infrastructure and defenses of his chosen inheritance. Even in retirement, he remained actively engaged in practical construction work. The timing of Joshua's inheritance allocation was significant. By waiting until everyone else had received their portions, Joshua demonstrated that true leadership means putting others' needs before your own. His example established a standard for future leaders that service, not self-interest, should drive decision-making. The location in Ephraim also positioned Joshua within his family's tribal territory, allowing him to maintain connections with his relatives and tribal responsibilities. Despite his national leadership role, Joshua never forgot his tribal identity and family obligations. The modest nature of Joshua's inheritance contrasted sharply with the vast territories he had conquered for others. While he could have claimed any city or region in the Promised Land, he chose a simple hill town that reflected his unpretentious character and genuine humility. Among all the legal innovations introduced in the Promised Land, none was more revolutionary than the cities of refuge system. This framework protected accused killers from revenge, while ensuring that justice would ultimately be served through proper legal proceedings. Chapter 20, verse 1 establishes the divine origin of this system. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "Tell the Israelites to designate the cities of refuge as I instructed you through Moses." This wasn't a human invention. It was part of God's comprehensive legal code designed to balance mercy with justice. The specific purpose of these cities was clearly defined. Verses 2 and 3 explain their function, so that anyone who kills a person accidentally and unintentionally may flee there and find protection from the avenger of blood. When they flee to one of these cities, they are to stand in the entrance of the city gate and state their case before the elders of that city. Then the elders are to admit the person into their city and provide a place to live among them. The system included built-in safeguards against abuse. Verse 4 describes the initial protection process. If the avenger of blood comes in pursuit, the elders must not surrender the fugitive, because the fugitive killed their neighbor unintentionally and without malice aforethought. And the burden of proof was on the accusers to demonstrate premeditated murder. The legal process was thorough and fair. Verse 6 outlines the full procedure. They are to stay in that city until they have stood trial before the assembly and until the death of the high priest who is serving at that time. Then they may go back to their own home in the town from which they fled. The trial system ensured that evidence would be properly evaluated before final judgment. The geographic distribution of refuge cities ensured accessibility throughout the land. Verses 7 through 9 list the locations. So they set apart Kadesh in Galilee in the hill country of Naphtali, Shechem in the hill country of Ephraim, and Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, in the hill country of Judah. East of the Jordan, on the other side from Jericho. They designated Bezer in the wilderness on the plateau in the tribe of Reuben, Ramoth in Gilead in the tribe of Gad, and Golan in Bashan in the tribe of Manasseh. Any of the Israelites or any foreigner residing among them who killed someone accidentally could flee to these designated cities and not be killed by the avenger of blood prior to standing trial before the assembly. The system protected both Israelites and foreigners equally, demonstrating God's concern for universal justice. The strategic placement ensured that no one would be more than a day's journey from safety, making the refuge system practically accessible to everyone in the land. The innovation represented a major advance in ancient legal thinking. Instead of allowing unlimited blood revenge, the system channeled the desire for justice through proper legal procedures while protecting the innocent from hasty retribution. The allocation of 48 cities to the Levites created more than just housing for the priestly tribe. It established a nationwide network for education, legal guidance, and religious instruction that would preserve Israel's covenant identity across all tribal territories. Chapter 21, verse 2, records the Levites' formal request at Shiloh in Canaan and said to them, "The Lord commanded through Moses that you give us towns to live in, with pasture lands for our livestock." This wasn't a demand for special privilege. It was the fulfillment of specific divine instructions given decades earlier. The distribution was proportional to each tribe's territorial size. Verse 3 describes the allocation principle. "So, as the Lord had commanded, the Israelites gave the Levites the following towns and pasture lands out of their own inheritance." Every tribe contributed cities from their own inheritance, ensuring that the burden was shared fairly across the nation. The Kohathite division received the most significant allocation. Verses 4 and 5 detail their inheritance. The first lot came out for the Kohathites, according to their clans. The Levites, who were descendants of Aaron the priest, were allotted 13 towns from the tribes of Judah, Simeon, and Benjamin. The rest of Kohath's descendants were allotted 10 towns from the clans of the tribes of Ephraim, Dan, and half of Manasseh. The Gershonite and Merarite divisions received their portions according to the same systematic approach. Verses 6 and 7 continue the distribution. The descendants of Gershon were allotted 13 towns from the clans of the tribes of Issachar, Asher, Naphtali, and the half-tribe of Manasseh in Bashan. The descendants of Merari, according to their clans, received 12 towns from the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and Zebulun. The total allocation represented a significant investment in religious infrastructure. Verse 8 summarizes the scope. "So the Israelites allotted to the Levites these towns and their pasture lands, as the Lord had commanded through Moses. 48 cities with surrounding agricultural land provided substantial support for the priestly tribe's educational and religious functions." The strategic distribution ensured that every tribal territory had Levitical presence. No tribe would be without access to religious instruction, legal guidance, or ceremonial expertise. This network would help maintain theological and legal consistency across the entire nation. The inclusion of pasture lands with each city was crucial for economic sustainability. The Levites could raise livestock and engage in limited agriculture while maintaining their primary focus on religious duties. This economic base provided stability for their educational and judicial functions. The city network also served as a communication system for disseminating religious information and legal decisions. Levites could travel between cities, sharing developments in legal interpretation and religious practice, ensuring that all tribes remained connected to the central religious authority at the tabernacle. After 7 years of military service west of the Jordan River, the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh finally received permission to return to their families and territories. Their departure marked both a celebration of faithful service and the beginning of new challenges for national unity. Chapter 22, verse 1 sets the scene for this momentous occasion. Then Joshua summoned the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. These warriors had fulfilled their commitment far beyond the minimum requirements. Participating in every major campaign of the conquest period, Joshua's address acknowledged their exceptional service. Verses 2 through 4 contain his formal recognition. and said to them, "You have done all that Moses the servant of the Lord commanded, and you have obeyed me in everything I commanded. For a long time now, to this very day, you have not deserted your fellow Israelites, but have carried out the mission the Lord your God gave you. Now that the Lord your God has given them rest as he promised, return to your homes in the land that Moses the servant of the Lord gave you on the other side of the Jordan." The emotional weight of this separation was enormous. These men had left their families as young warriors and were returning as battle-hardened veterans. Their children had grown up without fathers, their wives had managed households alone, and their communities had developed during their absence. Joshua's final instructions emphasized spiritual priorities above material concerns. Verse 5 contains his farewell charge, "But be very careful to keep the commandment and the law that Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you, to love the Lord your God, to walk in obedience to him, to keep his commands, to hold fast to him, and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul." Military service was ending, but spiritual service was lifelong. The blessing ceremony marked the formal conclusion of their military obligation. Verse 6 records Joshua's farewell. "Then Joshua blessed them and sent them away, and they went to their homes." This wasn't just a dismissal, it was a celebration of completed duty and a recognition of their contribution to national success. The material rewards for their service were substantial. Verses 7 and 8 describe their accumulated wealth. When Joshua sent them home, he blessed them, saying, "Return to your homes with your great wealth, with large herds of livestock, with silver, gold, bronze, and iron, and a great quantity of clothing, and divide the plunder from your enemies with your fellow tribesmen." 7 years of conquest had produced considerable spoils of war. The return journey was filled with mixed emotions. These warriors were eager to reunite with their families, but sad to leave comrades who had become brothers through shared battles. The bonds formed during the conquest would endure, but physical separation would test those relationships. The departure also created new administrative challenges for Israel's leadership. The Eastern tribes' military contribution had been crucial during the conquest, and their absence would require adjustments in defense planning and tribal cooperation for future challenges. What should have been a joyful homecoming nearly erupted into civil war when the Eastern tribes built a memorial altar that was misinterpreted as religious rebellion. The crisis revealed deep concerns about national unity and proper worship that required careful diplomatic resolution. The construction project began innocently enough. Chapter 22. Verse 10 describes the building activity. "When they came to Geliloth near the Jordan in the land of Canaan, the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh built an imposing altar there by the Jordan." The location was on the border between Eastern and Western territories, making it visible to travelers from both sides. But news of the altar construction triggered immediate alarm among the Western tribes. Verse 11 records their reaction. "And when the Israelites heard that they had built the altar on the border of Canaan at Geliloth, near the Jordan on the Israelite side, the Western tribes assumed this was an attempt to establish unauthorized worship competing with the tabernacle at Shiloh. The response was swift and potentially devastating." Verse 12 reveals the scale of mobilization. The whole assembly of Israel gathered at Shiloh to go to war against them. The prospect of civil war loomed large as both sides prepared for conflict based on misunderstanding and incomplete information. Cooler heads prevailed through diplomatic intervention. Verses 13 and 14 describe the peace mission. "So the Israelites sent Phinehas, son of Eleazar, the priest, to the land of Gilead, to Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. With him they sent 10 of the chief men, one from each of the tribes of Israel, each the head of a family division among the Israelite clans. The delegation included both religious and tribal leadership. The accusation was serious and direct." Verses 15 and 16 contain the Western tribes' charges. "When they went to Gilead, to the Reubenites, the Gadites and the half-tribe of Manasseh. They said to them, "The whole assembly of the Lord says, how could you break faith with the God of Israel like this? How could you turn away from the Lord and build yourselves an altar in rebellion against him now?" The historical precedent for their concern was valid. Verses 17 and 18 reference past disasters. Was not the sin of Peor enough for us? Up to this very day, we have not cleansed ourselves from that sin, even though a plague fell on the community of the Lord. And are you now turning away from the Lord? If you rebel against the Lord today, tomorrow he will be angry with the whole assembly of Israel. The eastern tribe's response was immediate and passionate. Verses 21 and 22 contained their defense. Then Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh replied to the heads of the clans of Israel, "The mighty one, God the Lord. The mighty one, God the Lord. He knows, and let Israel know. If this has been in rebellion or disobedience to the Lord, do not spare us this day." The true purpose of the altar was finally revealed. Verses 26 through 28 explain their motivation. That is why we said, "Let us get ready and build an altar, but not for burnt offerings or sacrifices. On the contrary, it is to be a witness between us and you and the generations after us, that we will worship the Lord at his sanctuary with our burnt offerings, sacrifices, and fellowship offerings. Then in the future, your descendants will not be able to say to ours, 'You have no share in the Lord.'" And we said, "If they ever say this to us, or to our descendants, we will answer, 'Look at the replica of the Lord's altar, which our ancestors built, not for burnt offerings and sacrifices, but as a witness between us and you.'" As Joshua felt his strength declining and his death approaching, he called Israel's leadership together for a final address designed to prepare the nation for the challenges they would face after his passing. His speech was strategically crafted to reinforce the lessons of the conquest period. Chapter 23, verse 1, establishes the timing and context. After a long time had passed and the Lord had given Israel rest from all their enemies around them, Joshua, by then a very old man, the peaceful conditions provided an ideal opportunity for reflection and instruction without the pressure of immediate military threats. Joshua's opening words immediately established his authority and the source of Israel's success. Verse 2 contains his initial statement, "Summoned all Israel, their elders, leaders, judges, and officials, and said to them, 'I am very old.'" His advanced age gave weight to his words as the testimony of extensive experience. The systematic review began with acknowledging God's faithfulness. Verses 3 and 4 outline the divine accomplishments. "You yourselves have seen everything the Lord your God has done to all these nations for your sake. It was the Lord your God who fought for you. Remember how I have allotted as an inheritance for your tribes all the land of the nations that remain, the nations I conquered between the Jordan and the Mediterranean Sea in the west." The promise for future expansion was clearly stated. Verse 5 contains God's ongoing commitment. "The Lord your God himself will push them out for your sake. He will drive them out before you, and you will take possession of their land, as the Lord your God promised you." The conquest was incomplete, but divine assistance would continue. Joshua's warnings focused on the greatest threats to Israel's future success. Verses 6 through 8 identify the critical requirements. "Be very strong. Be careful to obey all that is written in the book of the law of Moses, without turning aside to the right or to the left. Do not associate with these nations that remain among you. Do not invoke the names of their gods or swear by them. You must not serve them or bow down to them. But you are to hold fast to the Lord your God, as you have until now." The consequences of disobedience were spelled out in stark terms. Verses 12 through 13 contain his solemn warning, "But if you turn away and ally yourselves with the survivors of these nations that remain among you, and if you intermarry with them and associate with them, then you may be sure that the Lord your God will no longer drive out these nations before you. Instead, they will become snares and traps for you, whips on your backs and thorns in your eyes. until you perish from this good land, which the Lord your God has given you." The address concluded with a personal testimony of God's faithfulness. Verses 14 and 15 record Joshua's final declaration, "Now I am about to go the way of all the earth. You know with all your heart and soul that not one of all the good promises the Lord your God gave you has failed. Every promise has been fulfilled. Not one has failed. But just as all the good things the Lord your God has promised you have come to you, so he will bring on you all the evil things he has threatened, until the Lord your God has destroyed you from this good land he has given you." For his final public act as Israel's leader, Joshua organized a massive covenant renewal ceremony at Shechem, where the entire nation would formally recommit to exclusive worship of Yahweh and reject all foreign gods and religious practices. Chapter 24. Verse 1 describes the assembly. "Then Joshua assembled all the tribes of Israel at Shechem. He summoned the elders, leaders, judges, and officials of Israel, and they presented themselves before God." The location was significant. Shechem was where Abraham had first received God's promise about the land, making it an ideal place for covenant renewal. Joshua's address began with an extensive historical review designed to remind Israel of God's faithfulness throughout their national experience. Verses 2 through 13 provide a comprehensive narrative. Joshua said to all the people, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Long ago your ancestors, including Terah the father of Abraham and Nahor, lived beyond the Euphrates River and worshipped other gods. But I took your father Abraham from the land beyond the Euphrates and led him throughout Canaan and gave him many descendants." The historical recitation covered every major event from Abraham's call through the conquest of Canaan, emphasizing that Israel's success came entirely from divine intervention rather than human achievement. The purpose was to establish gratitude as the foundation for renewed commitment. The challenge Joshua presented was direct and uncompromising. Verse 14 contains his call for decision. "Now fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods your ancestors worshipped beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt, and serve the Lord." The choice required active rejection of false gods, not just passive neglect. Joshua's personal declaration became one of the most famous statements in Israel's history. Verse 15 records his family's commitment, "But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates, or the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you are living. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord." This wasn't just national policy, it was personal conviction. The people's response was immediate and emphatic. Verses 16 through 18 contain their declaration. "Then the people answered, 'Far be it from us to forsake the Lord to serve other gods. It was the Lord our God himself who brought us and our parents up out of Egypt from that land of slavery and performed those great signs before our eyes. He protected us on our entire journey and among all the nations through which we traveled. And the Lord drove out before us all the nations, including the Amorites who lived in the land. We too will serve the Lord, because he is our God." But Joshua challenged their commitment, testing the sincerity of their declaration. Verses 19 and 20 contain his sobering response. Joshua said to the people, "You are not able to serve the Lord. He is a holy God. He is a jealous God. He will not forgive your rebellion and your sins. If you forsake the Lord and serve foreign gods, he will turn and bring disaster on you and make an end of you after he has been good to you." The people persisted in their commitment despite Joshua's warnings. Verses 21 through 24 record the final exchange. "But the people said to Joshua, 'No, we will serve the Lord.' Then Joshua said, 'You are witnesses against yourselves that you have chosen to serve the Lord.' 'Yes, we are witnesses,' they replied. "Now then," said Joshua, "throw away the foreign gods that are among you and yield your hearts to the Lord, the God of Israel." And the people said to Joshua, "We will serve the Lord our God and obey him." The conquest era came to a definitive end with the deaths of 3 giants whose lives had shaped Israel's destiny. Joshua, the military leader, Eleazar the high priest, and symbolically, Joseph through the final burial of his bones in the Promised Land. Chapter 24, verse 29 records Joshua's death. After these things, Joshua, son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110. The title Servant of the Lord was the same designation given to Moses, indicating that Joshua had successfully fulfilled his divine commission and earned the highest honor available to any leader. The location of Joshua's burial reflected his humble character to the end. Verse 30 describes his final resting place. And they buried him in the land of his inheritance, at Timnath-Serah in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gaash. He was laid to rest in the simple mountain town he had chosen as his personal inheritance, avoiding any grand monuments or prestigious burial sites. The immediate aftermath of Joshua's death revealed the strength of his leadership legacy. Verse 31 provides crucial testimony. Israel served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua and of the elders who outlived him and who had experienced everything the Lord had done for Israel. The generation trained under Joshua's leadership maintained covenant faithfulness based on their personal experience of God's power. Eleazar's death marked the end of another era in Israel's spiritual leadership. Verse 33 records his passing. And Eleazar, son of Aaron, died and was buried at Gibeah, which had been allotted to his son Phinehas in the hill country of Ephraim, as high priest throughout the conquest period. Eleazar had served as the crucial link between Moses' religious legacy and the next generation of spiritual leadership. The final burial mentioned in the chapter carried special symbolic significance. Verse 32 describes the completion of a promise made centuries earlier, and Joseph's bones, which the Israelites had brought up from Egypt, were buried at Shechem in the tract of land that Jacob bought for 100 pieces of silver from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem. This became the inheritance of Joseph's descendants. This burial fulfilled Joseph's dying request in Genesis and symbolized that Israel had truly come home. The location of Joseph's burial was carefully chosen. Shechem was not only where Jacob had purchased land, but also where the recent covenant renewal ceremony had taken place. Joseph's bones were laid to rest in the same area where Israel had just recommitted to serving God, creating a powerful connection between past promises and present commitments. The timing of these deaths and burial marked a clear transition point in Israel's history. The generation that had experienced Egypt, the wilderness, and the conquest was passing away. The leaders who had guided Israel through the most dramatic period of their national existence were gone, leaving the next generation to maintain the inheritance they had won. The preservation of Joseph's bones through 4 centuries demonstrated the power of faith and the reliability of God's promises. Despite slavery, wilderness wandering, and military campaigns, Israel had carefully preserved these physical remains as a testimony to their confidence that they would eventually reach the promised land. The burial legacy established important precedents for Israel's future. Joshua's simple mountain grave, Eleazar's family burial site, and Joseph's ceremonial interment all emphasize that true greatness comes from faithful service rather than impressive monuments. The conquest era was ending not with grand celebrations, but with quiet testimony to lives well lived in service to God. If this journey through Joshua has opened your eyes to something new, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss our next biblical adventure. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that no giant is too big for God. And let me know in the comments which moment from Joshua's story hit you the most. The conquest may be over, but your story is just beginning. What inheritance is God calling you to claim? What giants are you ready to face? Let Joshua's courage inspire your next step Thanks for joining me on this incredible journey through the book of Joshua, where the impossible becomes God's specialty. I'll see you in the next video.